Even before he sat on the throne, Joram already carried the weight of the name he inherited on his shoulders. He was the son of Ahab, king of Israel, and Jezebel, the most feared woman in the kingdom. He was born in a palace in Samaria, surrounded by luxury, but also by intrigue, idolatry, and innocent bloodshed. She grew up hearing whispers in the corridors, seeing the altars of Baal glowing in the night, and witnessing the clashes between her parents and the prophets of the true God. The air in the palace was heavy. Even the silence seemed to hide something. Joram had no ordinary childhood. There was no room to run around in the gardens or play freely. Everything was watched, controlled, and calculated. While other children heard stories about heroes, he heard about how to maintain power at any cost. What shaped his character was not an example of justice or faith, but a constant game of manipulation and appearance. Jezebel, his mother, was a cold strategist, and Ahab, his father, was a weak king in her hands. This marked Joram. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the content, feel free to support our work with financial aid by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. You can also become a member of the channel and enjoy exclusive benefits. He wasn't the first in line to the throne. His brother Ahaziah took over the kingdom when Ahab died. But Ahaziah had a short and disastrous reign. A fall left him seriously injured, and even then, he didn't seek God. He consulted foreign gods. He ended up dying without leaving any heirs. And that's when eyes turned to Joram. When he was crowned, it was already known that the people were tired of empty promises, of leaders who knelt before idols while the people suffered. Samaria still breathed the smell of Baal's sacrifices, and Jezebel's name was still spoken with fear. Against this turbulent backdrop, Joram ascended the throne. But unlike his brother, he didn't want to repeat everything, at least not in the same way. When Joram finally took the throne, Israel was already wounded inside. The people looked at him with a mixture of distrust and hope. Distrust because of the blood that ran through their veins. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he would be different. It was the 18th year of Jehoshaphat's reign in Judah, a king known for fearing God. While Judah was flourishing with a certain order, Israel was sinking into silent chaos, and Joram was now the man sitting in the chair that had once belonged to Ahab, his father. And then something unexpected happened. One of his first acts as king was to have the pillar of Baal that his father and mother had protected so much destroyed. This took many people by surprise. It was as if someone had kicked over the altar of a feared god. Many stopped and thought, is he really going to break with the past? The move was bold, symbolic, but that's all it was. Joram did the minimum to appear different, but he didn't have the courage to go all the way. He tore down the symbol, but kept the system. He didn't touch Jeroboam's sins. The golden calves were still standing, and the people continued to worship in their own way, far from God's will. It was like painting the walls of a house full of cracks. On the outside it looked new, but on the inside, everything was slowly falling apart. Deep down, Joram wanted stability. He wanted respect. He didn't want to be remembered only as Jezebel's son. But his actions lacked firmness. It was as if he was walking through a minefield, trying to avoid displeasing everyone at once. And it was just then, while he was trying to keep up appearances and balance the government, that news reached the palace. Moab, that old vassal kingdom, had rebelled. They were no longer going to pay tribute. They no longer recognized the authority of Israel's throne. Moab's rebellion stirred Joram's pride. They had been obliged to pay tribute since the time of Ahab, handing over thousands of rams and lambs with wool every year. It was a forced agreement, but a clear sign of who was in charge. When Mesa, the king of Moab, stomped his foot and said no more, Joram saw it not only as a political affront, but also as a threat to his still fresh authority on the throne. He knew that if he let it go, others might do the same, and that would be the beginning of the end. But Joram was not a warrior like David, nor wise like Solomon. Nevertheless, he decided to act. He went to Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and asked for help. Jehoshaphat, who, despite being righteous, was soft-hearted when it came to alliances with Israel, agreed to march alongside him. What's more, they dragged the king of Edom along for the ride. 3 kings, 3 armies, 1 goal, to show Moab who was still in charge. The plan was to cross the desert of Edom and surprise the Moabites by a less expected route. But what seemed strategic turned into a nightmare. 7 days, walking under a cruel sun, with the ground cracking under the soldiers' feet and the canteens drying up at every step. Not a drop of water in sight. Horses falling over, men fainting. What was supposed to be a quick victory turned into a silence full of fear. It was in this crush that the wiser Jehoshaphat looked around and asked the question that Joram didn't. Is there not a prophet of the Lord here to guide us? It was as if, in the middle of the mess, someone had finally remembered to ask God what to do. And the name that came up was straight as an arrow, Elisha. When they called Elisha, the atmosphere was already tense. The soldiers were on the verge of collapse, the kings were sweating under their armor, and the horses were panting with thirst. Elisha appeared as if he already knew what was going on, serious, direct, with that look that pierces the soul. And he didn't hide his feelings. He turned to Joram and said, "If it weren't for Jehoshaphat, I wouldn't even look you in the face." Imagine the tension. A prophet saying that in front of all the armies. But Elisha wasn't like the court sycophants of Samaria. He served only one king. Even with anger stuck in his throat, he asked for a musician. Someone began to play, and the atmosphere changed. It was as if heaven had opened up in the middle of the desert. And then the word came. But it wasn't what they expected. Dig many graves in this valley. That was it. No explanation, no apparent logic. Elisha continued, "You won't see wind or rain, but this valley will be filled with water. You, your flocks and your animals will drink it." It was a strange order, almost absurd. Dig holes in the dry ground? What do you mean? But in that situation, with no way out, obeying was the only way forward. The next morning, with the sun rising behind the mountains, the water appeared. It came silently, rushing down the valley, filling the pits as if from nowhere. A miracle without noise, without thunder, but impossible to ignore. The men ran for their canteens, the animals revived, and the soldiers took another deep breath. The march could continue. But on the other side, the Moabites saw something strange. The reflection of the light on the newly arrived water looked like blood, a lot of blood. They looked and thought, "The kings must have fought among themselves. They're all dead." And on an impulse of greed, they rushed down from the camp, ready to plunder. What they didn't know was that they were running straight into a trap. The Moabites went down confidently, thinking they were going to collect the spoils of a war between kings. They shouted, banged their weapons on their shields, tasting victory even before the fight. But as soon as they set foot in the camp, they realized that they had been mistaken, and badly. The armies of Israel, Judah and Edom were alive, whole and thirsty. But this time, not for water. It was an unintentional ambush. They arrived disorganized, thinking of plunder, and were met by sharp spears and drawn swords. What was supposed to be a party turned into a massacre. The Moabites were so frightened that they didn't even have time to react. Many fell right there, others fled, tripping over each other without even looking back. Joram's army advanced with force, taking advantage of the disorder. They destroyed everything in their path. They took cities, cut off water sources, and filled fertile fields with stones. Each step left a mark. It was as if Israel was wiping Moab off the map. One by one, the Moabite centers of strength fell, until only one fortified city remained, Kir Harasith. There was the last breath of resistance, but the 3 kings surrounded the city with everything they had. Inside, King Mesa watched helplessly as his people were crushed. The siege was tightening. There was no way out, no reinforcements. And then he did something that chilled the blood of even those most accustomed to war. In the last desperate attempt, Mesa took his firstborn son, the heir to the throne, and sacrificed him on the wall in front of everyone. The cry of that sacrifice rang through the camp. The men of Israel stopped. The men of Judah were shocked. Even the soldiers of Edom looked at each other without understanding. Something in that scene broke the rhythm of victory. And it was after that that the unexpected happened. The silence after the sacrifice was heavy, almost unbearable. The smell of smoke still rose, mixed with the dust of the desert, and the astonishment clinging to the skin of every soldier. The image of the king of Moab offering up his own son on the top of the wall, that was on everyone's mind. Even those who were prepared for anything in war didn't know how to react. It was more than brutality. It was pure, open desperation thrown in the faces of 3 armies. No one had expected it. Not Joram, not Jehoshaphat, and certainly not the king of Edom. And then, as if something invisible had changed in the air, the Israelites retreated, not because they had been defeated, but because that scene had broken something inside them. Victory seemed certain, the war was almost over, but the mood turned. An indignation gripped the camp. Some said it was anger, others said it was fear. Maybe it was both. The fact is, they went home. Joram arrived in Samaria with a taste of blood in his mouth and empty hands. He had the chance to finish off Moab, but he returned before the final blow was struck. The war didn't bring glory, it didn't reinforce his image as king. It only left more questions in the air. The people murmured. Some called him weak. Others said he had aroused the fury of foreign gods. And Joram himself, he said nothing. He just carried the weight of what he had seen. But the clock was ticking, and chaos, when it begins, comes in waves. While the dust of the war was still settling, Israel was plunged into a new crisis, this time at home. The famine in Samaria hit hard. It wasn't just scarcity, it was desperation. The streets were filled with skinny, sunken-eyed people, children crying without strength, mothers looking lost. The whole city became a picture of misery. The few grains that remained were sold for gold. Donkey heads, food husks, even dung were traded as meals. It was a time when dignity disappeared and survival ruled. Joram walked around the city walls, looking at the people who no longer had any hope. And it was there that he heard something that made him stop in the middle of the road. 2 women were shouting at each other. One of them, with anger on her face, told him what had happened. "We agreed to eat my son yesterday and hers today. I cooked mine, but now she's hiding hers." That dropped like a stone in the king's stomach. Hunger had turned into cannibalism. It was no longer just a problem, it was an open wound. At that moment, Joram tore off his upper garments. It was a sign of mourning, of pain. But underneath, he was wearing sackcloth. In other words, he was in hidden mourning, as if he wanted to show strength on the outside and hide his fear on the inside. And when he heard the women's story, he exploded. Instead of breaking down or seeking God, he swore revenge. "If Elisha's head rests on his shoulders today, may God punish me." Once again, the prophet became a target. Joram was tired of promises, miracles that didn't come, prophecies that seemed to be slow in coming. He wanted someone to blame, and Elisha was the closest name. He sent a messenger to the prophet's house, but Elisha, who already knew what was coming, was not intimidated. He looked at the messenger and said, "This time tomorrow there will be plenty at the gates of Samaria." That night, while the city slept hungry and Elisha's head was still sworn to death, the Syrians' camp was silent. Tents were pitched, supplies stocked, weapons ready. Everything indicated that the siege of Samaria would continue for many days. But then, in the middle of the night, a sound began to echo across the desert. First low, then loud, then deafening, like the roar of war chariots, rushing horses, whole armies approaching. The Syrians woke up in a panic. Someone shouted, "The kings of Israel have hired the Egyptians and the Hittites against us." Without a second thought, they dropped everything. It was as simple as that. They left pots on the fire, tents open, gold and silver scattered on the ground. They fled in the dark, tripping over their own feet as if an invisible army was on their tail. Meanwhile, on this side of the walls, nobody knew anything. Hunger still gripped the stomachs of the strongest. But outside the city, 4 lepers, rejected men, decided to take a chance. If we stay here, we'll die. If we go to the camp, we might die too. But at least we tried. And off they went, staggering, hoping to find armed soldiers. All they found was silence. Every step between the tents was a surprise, no one there. Only food, clothes, treasures. They ate to their fill, laughed like people who couldn't believe it, and began to hide gold. But in the midst of this abundance, conscience spoke louder. If we keep this to ourselves, evil will befall us. Let's tell the people. They ran back to Samaria with the news. At first, no one believed them. But Joram, suspicious, sent some men to check it out. They went and came back with confirmation. It was all true. The Syrians had fled, and the city now had access to everything it had previously lacked. Elisha's prophecy had come true, just as he had said. When the news spread, the city gate became a sea of people. There was shouting, pushing and shoving, weeping with joy and running everywhere. Everyone wanted to leave at the same time to reach the Syrian camp and grab whatever they could: flour, barley, gold, clothes. The crowd was like an uncontrolled river. But there was one man there, right at the entrance, who couldn't take a step. He was Joram's trusted officer, the same one who had doubted Elisha's word the day before. When the prophet said that there would be plenty, he scoffed. Even if God opened the windows of heaven, it wouldn't happen. Elisha, on the spot, replied firmly, "You'll see it with your eyes, but you won't eat anything." And that's exactly what happened. In the confusion, the people ran over everything and everyone, and the officer, who was at the gate controlling the exit, was crushed. He died right there, trampled by those who ran to see the miracle fulfilled. He saw it, yes, but he didn't taste it. The irony was cruel and clear, like a sharp blade. The city that cried yesterday now celebrated, and what seemed impossible became reality. Meanwhile, Joram watched from afar, with a bitter taste in his mouth. The people celebrated, gave thanks, and spoke of God's power. But even in the face of so many signs, he still had a divided heart. He was never a direct enemy of God like his parents, but he never surrendered completely either. He always walked in the middle of the road, trying to keep up appearances, and time was passing. Out in the countryside, another story was beginning to unfold. An old name resurfaced, an army commander, brave, daring, faithful to duty, but with a secret mission, Jehu. And what was about to happen would change the fate of the entire kingdom. Jehu was in the midst of battle when the messenger arrived. Elisha had sent for him. It was unusual for a commander to drop everything in the middle of a war, but when a prophet speaks, even the bravest man stops to listen. Jehu entered the room, and the young man sent by Elisha didn't hold back. He took a pot of oil and poured it over the warrior's head. "Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel." Before Jehu could react, the messenger ran out, as if the place was on fire. It was like this, out of the blue, that Jehu received his mission. But it came with a burden, to wipe out the entire house of Ahab. That included Joram. He wasted no time. He mounted his war chariot and set off straight for Jezreel, where Joram was recovering from battle wounds. The king, seeing the dust on the horizon, sent to ask if he was coming in peace. But Jehu replied coolly, "What peace, while the prostitution of Jezebel your mother lasts?" The phrase cut through the air like thunder. Joram understood instantly. This was the end. He tried to get away. He turned the car around and accelerated, but there was no time. Jehu drew his bow, took steady aim, and released the arrow. The tip pierced Joram's heart, and he fell dead inside the chariot. Jehu then had the body thrown into Naboth's field, the same one that Ahab had taken by force after killing its owner. It was as if the land had waited years to see justice done. The blood of the son fell on the same ground where the blood of the innocent had been spilled. A cycle was closed without words. Joram was the kind of king who tried to live in the middle. He wasn't totally against God, but he was never completely for him either. He tore down the altars of Baal, yes, but he kept the old sins. He listened to the prophets, but doubted their words. He showed his repentance in public, but deep down his heart remained divided, and life took a heavy toll on him for that choice. His story doesn't just end with an arrow through his chest or his body thrown into Naboth's field. It ends as a warning, silent but strong, about the danger of walking with God halfway. Joram was not like Ahab, who gave himself over to evil without shame. Nor was he like Jehoshaphat, who sincerely sought God's will. He was the lukewarm one, the indecisive one, the king of almost. The greatest lesson that Joram's life leaves us with is that trying to please everyone, trying to appear righteous without really being transformed, doesn't sustain anyone for long. In the end, the mask falls. The pressure of life reveals what's inside. And when hunger strikes, when war comes, when the people cry out, you either stand firm in what you believe in, or you fall apart. Joram had chances. He had miracles before his eyes. He had the prophet Elisha nearby. He had deliverances, warnings, signs, but he preferred his comfort zone, and that choice left him vulnerable. He ended up dying in the same field that his father had taken with blood. It's as if God had shown him that no one gets away with ignoring justice. Joram's story is for everyone who has ever thought about standing on the fence, thinking that you can follow God halfway. You can't. Either you give yourself up for real, or you live like he did, stuck between two paths, with no peace, no direction, and no legacy worth remembering. If you liked Joram's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.